Master's birthday, January 5th. Just turned my mind to that. Not having known him in the body. Feeling as if I've met him in the spirit. And God. But true spiritual masters are like a doorway. They're like a conduit between the infinite and ourselves. We suddenly believe in or can see possibilities where before they didn't seem real to us somehow. And in the beginning, in the kind of relationship between the aspirant and someone who has some realization, it feels as if there's this connection that every time we're around, and it certainly was true with me, with Mother, that any time I was around her, it wasn't always easy, but I always felt her influence. I always felt the power of God within her. It changed me. It changed the vibration within me. It changed the feeling within me. I could feel that power emanating from her. Sometimes it was subtle, sometimes more powerful, but it always uplifted me and brought me closer to God. Sometimes it was difficult. I could be in her presence for several hours and end up having a headache, or, it's just because the power was so intense. My nervous system wasn't ready for it yet. But these great spiritual teachers and masters come into our lives for that reason, and just because they've left their body, just because they're no longer in a physical body, does not in any way at all minimize or decrease their influence on us. So I'm thinking about Master's birthday in January. It reminded me of an experience that I had, and I've spoken of a couple of times, of sitting in my year of silence and just the deepening quiet. It's hard to describe what that deepening quiet is like. It's a little bit like being maybe up in the mountains, and if you stood on a peak and you just felt kind of a stillness in the air, a purity up in those mountains, and you felt your spirit expand, just spread out over space more and more. My year in silence was like residing on a mountaintop like that for long periods of time. And in the silence, it allowed the spirit to move forward. So much of our lives is taken up in day-to-day activities, just living our lives, mundane activities. And it's difficult to have that time, to set aside that time, just strictly for focusing on God. And not only that, but our predisposition seems to be, it runs to the world. Our mind runs to the world. Our body runs to the world. It's just kind of how we're set up, how we're geared. So to think about turning aside from this world and turning inside is not the most natural thing that comes to us usually. There are some souls who feel it. It's the most natural thing in the world. But that's not usual, and that comes as an earned experience from previous incarnations, where they've spent that time in meditation, they've spent that time in quiet, and they feel themselves drawn in naturally. But for most of us, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. But when we spend that time and make that commitment, turn away from the world, and focus upon our own spirit, these subtle changes, and sometimes not so subtle changes, begin to take us over. We feel a transition happening in the body quiets down. I knew that coming to Cloud Mountain that there'd be a period of time where my body just would keep on running. I've been so active beforehand. I was doing a lot of traveling and that kind of thing. So I suspected that there would be a certain transition time where I would just need to be able to settle down into that quieter place. And that was the truth of it. 2 or 3 weeks and just, what am I doing, where's my to-do list at, and what do I got to do today? And it's just like getting quieter, bringing things down, listening to that deeper rhythm of life, getting attuned to what the pace and the rhythm would be like where I was at. And gradually that rhythm began to make itself known to me at a much slower rate. Most people say, oh, I just need such a vacation. I just really need some time away. What we really need is we need a shift of consciousness. We need to be able to tune into that slower rate, slow down, bring ourselves down. But so hard to do. But gradually through that year, that deeper, smoother rhythm really took me over. One night I was meditating and I was alerted somehow that something was outside my window. And I looked with my 2 eyes, and I didn't see anything with my physical eyes, but with my 3rd eye, I saw Mother there. And I knew that there was others who were with her. I was thrilled to see her there. So at first I thought, well, perhaps it's my imagination, and so I just closed my eyes again. And the thought came, I am here. Came back so powerfully into my mind that I looked again, and there she was again. Eyes open, but seeing her. Not in the physical, but in the astral. She came in, and we had just this wonderful chat, this wonderful conversation. I was able to ask her about some things, get confirmation on some things I was wondering about. And then I knew that also there was others who had come with her. And so I focused on, and I think Mother directed my mind towards that, and what I saw were these tremendously large feet, to the point where I could just see to the ankles, and I couldn't see above that. They were gigantic. And they were very unusual in that they were covered in deerskin shoes, which is a traditional mode of slippers or shoes that yogis use in India. And I knew that it was Yogananda, and I could feel that Mother was directing my mind towards Yogananda. As I focused on those feet, I realized I couldn't see any further than the ankles. And so I asked Yogananda if he would reduce himself to my size so I could see him more completely. And he did so. He accommodated me so that he could come within my vision. And we had a very long and really leisurely talk. I kept on expecting them to get up and go. The way that if you or I were to meet somebody famous and perhaps just, they're not going to be able to stay long, just a few words and then gone. But that wasn't it. They just stayed and they chatted, and it just seemed so leisurely, and they were completely at ease. And the most delightful thing is that either Mother or Master would start to laugh, and this, the only way I can describe it is bubbles of joy would start coming out of their belly region. And it would vibrate out, and it would start to resonate in me. And it's almost, none of these words are really quite adequate, but it's almost like a ticklish sensation inside of me that would just start bubbles of joy within my own belly region. And they had that often. It just came forward just naturally, beautifully. And one would start, and then the other one would start, and then I would start, and it was just this delightful thing. Of course, if anybody had walked into the room, they'd just think that I was talking to myself, they wouldn't have seen any of this. But for me, it was more real, or as real, more real in many ways than all of you sitting here right now. Their presence, the power of their presence, the upliftment, them being there, It's tremendous. It's just tremendous. So I was able to ask Master about many things. And one of the things he talked about was his householder path. And that he wanted this householder path to be acknowledged. He wanted to have it seen as legitimate, that Lahari Mahasya had brought it for the world. Because in India, so oftentimes, the preferences seem to be given to the sannyasis, those who have taken formal vows of renunciation. And he wanted it clear that this avenue, this approach that we have is for the householder. And it's through living our lives in the world, in our families, not separate from. There may be times of separation, even as I took and have taken some different times of separation from the world. If that's needed or required, that will be provided for. We don't need to worry about that. But the majority of our path is right here in the world. It's doing our work, it's tending to our families, it's living our lives, it's even taking vacations and enjoying ourselves in the world. It's all of it. It's not really that we can separate out our lives and say, well, this time that I spend in meditation is my spiritual life, and this other time is time when I work, and this other time I spend with my family, that's family time. And all of that is somehow separated out into these compartments where one doesn't really touch another. That's not how it is. Life is continuous. It's whole. It's complete into itself. It's the human mind that wants to divide things up and says, this is of God and this other is not of God. As Mother so oftentimes said, God is life and life is God. God is all of life. And she also said, when you're in business with God, you're in business with all of life. So when she went to the store, so many people knew her in these different stores. And she had visited them through many years, and she knew the clerks. And she said for a while she wondered, how did they all know her name? And then she realized she'd been using a credit card, so they all knew her as Mrs. Hamilton. But I went with Mother different times to the store. The Bon Marché, which is a store in Seattle, is a favorite store of hers. And the clerks there knew her and they loved her, and her interactions with them, her interactions with her hairdresser. People that she dealt with, that not in strictly spiritual way you might think of it all. And yet to see their faces when she walked in, oh, Mrs. Hamilton, how are you? And the interchange, and you could feel the interchange of energy. Now these individuals, I don't know how they thought of her. I think they all saw her as unique and wonderful person. But that they necessarily recognized her as a spiritual giant, I don't know. That's not how she presented herself to the world, and she didn't want to. She wanted to interact with life on its own terms. She didn't want a front. She didn't want a persona that she operated through that was very spiritual, all of this. She says spiritual life is not all this. It's all of life. And it's entering into life in its completeness. So it's important to recognize, as Yogananda was recognizing for me, that this completeness in life, this wholeness in life, that life is not to be separated out, but to be lived completely and wholly, is very, very important. The world wants to separate it because the mind wants to separate it. The mind wants to separate it because that's the function of the mind. The mind says, not this, not that. It includes this, but it excludes that. It's just the nature of the mind. The divine mind is different. The divine mind is expansive and inclusive. It expands out and it includes everything with it. The human mind tends to be contractive, and it tends to be exclusive. It breaks things down into smaller and smaller categories, creates names for those categories, and then it feels like it has some power over those categories. The divine mind spreads itself out. It expands out. It touches in with all aspects of life, but it sees all of life as continuous. This is an essential difference between the human mind and the divine mind. When your mind expands out and you feel your connection with something more than just the human body, that the human body, but also the human spirit, is connected with everything that is. So it's inclusive and it's expansive. You are entering into divine realms. And it's important for you to be able to distinguish that, because sometimes being uplifted in spiritual consciousness feels so natural, so much of who and what I've always been. I've known myself to be that. Even though I haven't experienced it somehow, I've known that for so long. And so when spiritual experiences come, they come as a confirmation of what you've already known, what you've already truly known about yourself. And so sometimes when we're in the middle of a spiritual experience, we think, well, of course, this is how life is. This is great. Isn't this how it's always going to be? Of course, to our crushing, disappointment, the old boundaries begin to come back in on us. Not because anything outside is imposing it on us. It's because of the habit nature of this mind. If we could carefully catalog the thoughts that happen between that moment of expansive, inclusive consciousness and when it turns into the contractive, exclusive consciousness, we would see that there would be a train of thoughts that have taken us from that expansive consciousness to the contractive consciousness. It's just been like a stair step right down. Now, it may be outside of our own conscious mind. It may feel like it's outside of our own control. However, these steps are ones of our own design. We design them, we give them power, and we implement them. Now that can seem terribly difficult and crushing to our ego, but it also holds great promise, because that means that it is within our control to change that. If we created it, we can uncreate it. We can do something differently. And one of the reasons why people don't enter in and continue to pursue a spiritual path is they really don't believe that they can change it. They think they're up against a barrier that is unbeatable. It's not true. It's not true, but the ego consciousness will certainly try to convince you that it's true. You cannot overcome yourself. You cannot go beyond your own limitations. You can't escape the gravity of your own ego consciousness. That's what the ego will tell you. But it is not true. And that is the message that these great spiritual masters have come to teach us. And unless we had examples, living examples, of those who have escaped that gravitational field of the ego, we wouldn't know it, we wouldn't believe it. Now, there are many in the world who can accept it about some savior, some prophet, some master, someplace else. Oh yeah, sure, they could do that. And that's actually a step in the right direction. At least there's some belief, there's some understanding that someone in all humanity could do it. But to take it closer, to bring it home, to say, but can I do that? Can I be transformed? Can I be changed? into something different than how I've experienced myself normally through this life? And this is the great question, and there is no answer that I can give to you that would suffice as a true answer. Because unless you are willing to pursue that path, to go the distance, you will not know, and it will not be satisfying for you to know from somebody else, me or anyone else. You must discover that yourself. And that is the eternally appealing aspect of this path, of the path of yoga, the path of all true spiritual mysticism, is that it is an experienceable truth. It is a truth that you can experience. Not just by believing it, not just by taking on a mental concept, but by going through those steps and expanding the consciousness and having it become a part of everything that it is, and having that experience ground itself into you to the point where that place inside of you that questions, that wonders, that doubts, is so touched by those experiences that you could no longer doubt. It's not an issue of not doubting because somebody told you have to believe it. It's not doubting because you know it, and you know that you know it. It's resonating through every cell of your body. And that is the point of realization. And when that experience becomes so pervasive within your being, then you will no longer have any room for doubt whatsoever. So realization is the death of doubt. But it does not come before, that doubt does not die before full realization. So until full realization, there is some doubt, there's some wondering. And I don't see that doubt or that wondering as a problem or as an enemy. It is your quest for truth. I want to know the truth. And I don't want to be led on some fool's errand. I want to know the truth. And I won't be satisfied until I discover that truth and know that truth to the degree that it pervades my entire being. That is why we come together. That is the purpose why each one of us come. And it is the greatest purpose that mankind can embark upon, because it covers every aspect of his being. And it offers the greatest rewards in terms of becoming eternally free in spirit. So with everything in me, I urge you to continue upon your sadhana. You will never regret it. I don't think one person ever leaves this world, leaves this body and their life, and regrets any spiritual effort they ever made. I don't think there's one person who does. I think there's a lot of things we regret. And having remembered many of my times of leaving this body, I know that there's many things that I've regretted in the past for not doing more of, for not trying more of, or things that I did do that I wish I hadn't done. But spiritual effort was never one of those things. Never one. So to think that, well, if I do spiritual effort, then I'll think I've lost out on some other opportunities or doing something else with my life. Number one, that's just not simply true, because if you're feeling truly and deeply prompted to do something, that too is part of your spiritual life. But the other part is that anytime you make spiritual effort, it is effort that is well worth it. You benefit mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. Some people have asked why I'm going to an ashram, and what do I expect to experience? And I always answer the same thing. I go because I'm prompted to go. I don't know what I'm going to experience. I have some thoughts about it. But, these days, I was thinking this morning, I was lying in bed and thinking about God. And I just felt myself like a baby, flying through the air. And I didn't have a care as to where the ground was, where I was flying to. None of it mattered. I felt completely free. My mind sometimes goes to, well, what will life look like when I come back from India? I have no idea. I have not even one clue. Can you believe it? But this is how my life has been. God told me to go on a 1-year retreat. I did so. He told me to get married. Okay. He told me to leave my work and rely completely on his care. All right. After you've been asked to do so many things, you give up on trying to find the answers of what's going to come out of this for me. It's just not about that. Following the divine will is sufficient in itself. And he has provided for me so perfectly and through the agency of you all so beautifully, and my heart just melts in gratitude. I just think, my God, it must be God's doing, because what is there in me? What is there in me? And I look inside and I don't see anything. I see someone who is prostrate at God's feet, loving God, serving God. But behind that I see nothing at all. And so I think, what is there? What is there but God? I think that when we're called on this path, there's something beyond real logic, something beyond reason that calls us. We don't even know the depth of that call sometimes. We don't know how deeply we're being called, but we know we are being called. We don't know where oftentimes. And when we can live in that complete and absolute trust, that openness, that what we are being called to, as long as we're being called to the light, as long as we're being called by God, that's sufficient. That's good enough all by itself. And there is nothing else that we need. Nothing else whatever. So I didn't even know what I was going to talk about. I didn't even know when I sat down I was going to start talking. So here we are, our wonderful spiritual family. I love you all so much. Are there any thoughts or questions?
I have a question for you. You said when you have that absolute clarity, then there's no more doubts.
Yes.
If you have it for a moment, then
That's the way it comes, isn't it? In the beginning. You get some moment of clarity. It seems so right, it seems so natural. You can't imagine being anything else other than that. And then gradually the gravity of the ego calls you back. And you come back into some shadow, some doubt, some darkness. You have a memory of the other, but it's not the vividness of the reality of that experience any longer. How Mother described it is that you pay the price and you go up on the mountain, and you're given some time up on the mountain. But because you've not paid the full price yet, you have to descend back into the valley again. You spend some time there, you learn, You love, you make mistakes perhaps, and then you make the ascent again. You get that energy going again through your own effort, through grace. And then you get lifted up to the peaks again, and you get that vision again. And maybe you stay a little longer. Maybe you see more clearly than you did before. But then you are drawn back down again. It's frustrating. It's maddening. Particularly when you can feel yourself begin to that descent and you don't want to go, you want to stay. But it is the nature of the path that you have to pay that supreme price. And what happens is you come back down into the valley, if your heart opens and you yearn to stay on those higher peaks, that is the desire nature that begins to set into motion your own spiritual growth. Now we get disappointed because it doesn't happen just in a moment. We seem to keep descending. And our heart continues to break and our desire nature grows and we want it so badly. If we could really know it, that is a great gift of grace. That yearning, that pain, that wanting to know the truth, that demand to know the truth. Indifference is the result of lack of that grace operating in our life. Indifference is the worst thing. It's that numbness, it's that middle land. As Gibran says, where we laugh but not all of our laughter, and we cry but not all of our tears. And it's where much of humanity lives at. Defending itself against life, pushing away those deeper callings, out of fear, out of greed, out of whatever the reason is. So when we descend back into the valley again and we feel that yearning, that crying out of the soul, that desire and that demand to know the truth, that is a moment of great grace. And even though it's painful, it is setting the groundwork for our next ascent, our next travel up. And rather than bemoan our fate, feel that pain, feel that yearning, feel that desire for truth, that need for truth. Just even as we have oxygen, I need to know the truth. And feel that that's great grace operating in your life. And if we're in trouble, isn't it better to know that we're in trouble and to have the desire to get out of trouble than it is to just fall into indifference and gradually go to sleep and fall deeper and deeper into trouble? At least we're being awakened. And it may seem insufficient, it may not feel like that's what I want. I want that awakening. Of course we do. Of course we do. But we must pay the price. That's the only way that there is around it. We must, because it is only with our ultimate will, for the divine will, that we can open ourselves completely to that grace. Told you several times, but it's a beautiful truth, and I think bearing worth repeating. When God showed me one time that the reason that we're not open to grace, because grace is given freely, that's the definition of grace. It's not something that's earned. It's something that's given and given freely. And it does have the power to go past everything, but God does not trespass against our own free will. And through our journey in this outward consciousness, we have projected the idea that we want to be separate from the divine will. We want what we want. I want what I want. And I don't care to surrender or think about the light over there, because I want this other experience. And that's what launched us off into this human incarnations. And it's only when our desire nature reaches the same intensity that I want only the divine will, and surrender only to the divine will, when that matches the intensity that we said, I don't want the divine will, I want what I want, they have to match in order for us to break that command that we gave, that God, I don't want you. I want to do it. And like been showing me, that's like a 2 or a 3-year-old, if the mother comes and says, trying to do some project, draw something or cut something out, and let me help you do it. No. I want to. Me, mine. Mine. And then just getting so angry and frustrated that it doesn't work, and just why it doesn't, and maybe crying for a long time. And then the mother says, come dear, let me help you. And guide your hand and show you how this works. And when the child submits to that and allows the mother to show it how it's done, then it works, and then it can get the idea, and then it can learn.
It's usually after the temper tantrum.
Yes. Not before. And so the child has to submit to the mother. The mother can't force her will on the child and say, no, I'm going to show you how to do this. Then they're just in this royal battle that they're probably not going to win. And so the child has to say, all right, mother, you guide my hand. You show me how to do this. And that's true with us. We have to say, all right, I'm erasing that old command. That this is my life, I want to do with it what I want to do with it, I'm going to find happiness, I know better, I. And we have to erase that and say, thy will be done.
It's kind of hard sometimes for me, because even when I hear what I'm supposed to do and I think, okay, I know what God wants me to do, I'm worried so much about what other people think because it doesn't look right.
Yes, I know. I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah. When I'm going to my year of silence and my mother's tears are just pouring down her face, just pouring down. Poor thing. But that's her interaction with my journey, and that's for God and for good too. But you have to be willing to disappoint people. And Ramakrishna says, unless you're willing to go against social conventions, you will not achieve your goal. You have to be willing to go beyond social conventions. What other people think, what your family thinks, what your friends think, what total strangers that you'll never ever see again, what they think. It's just amazing how much power we give to others.
You pitch the things that I've been most judgmental about.
How about that? I'll never be like that. And then we find ourselves being directed to be that. Yeah. So those are the exact tests, and those are the places of surrender. And again, if we could but know it, those are great moments of grace that it zeroes right in on our sore point. Right in on the point that, well, I didn't mean that exactly, I surrender this other stuff, that's easy, but don't bother me with that one. And sure enough, it goes right to that sore point. And there we are. This is the stuff of what the spiritual path is made up of. And it's everyday stuff. This isn't, thou shalt go out and climb Mount Everest. Go to work and have an attitude of service, selfless service all day. How about that? Try that. Might as well try to climb Mount Everest. It's just about as easy. You find all the places where you're attached, where you're connected, where you want what you want, where you get upset and peeved with other people because they're not doing how they should be doing and acting the way they should be doing, and all the hundreds of ways that we get sucked back into the game again. This is our spiritual path, and we can get disappointed. Well, I thought I'd be trekking in the Himalayas or something, not this, not working at 7-Eleven, having to deal with customers like this. That can't be spiritual path. That can't be what I'm here for. And yet, if that's where God has placed us, that's exactly where we ought to be. Doing exactly what we ought to be doing. How humbling. How wonderful. And so it's the quality of the mind that wants to say, no, that's not it. going to Ananda ashram and going and chanting all day long and being holy, and when I come back I'll be this perfected being. Then people will think I'm so wonderful. They'll never find criticism with me. It's not worked for me that way yet.
Greg's decided that the reason I'm going to an ashram is so he can be doing his sadhana with the children. It has nothing to do with me going to India. It's just like getting out of the house.
It's a wonderful gift when we really come into connection with, my life is my sadhana. My life is exactly where I'm supposed to be. The world is exactly as it ought to be. That is a wonderful grace, because suddenly our life comes into sharp focus. We know what we're about. And even though we don't know the end of the journey, or we don't even know what's going to happen in the next few minutes, maybe you say, well, what am I supposed to do with my life? You sit down and you say, okay, God, here I am. You prompt me, you guide me, you show me. Okay, clean the bathroom. Well, that garage, it can't be that. It's got to be something grand. Shouldn't I be down picking, poor people off the streets, or shouldn't I be tending the cancer patients, or name it, something else, not clean my bathroom. But there it is. Go to work every day. Perform your sadhana. Do what you came to do. Interact with people in a new way, out of your true self. Well, that sounds like hard work. And it is. It is. But what you gain is greater and greater freedom. When you really begin to surrender, when you really begin to attune your life, you feel that freedom. Not all the time, not every minute, because it's the pearl of great price. It comes in bits and pieces. But it does come. It does come. And suddenly, and I remember walking along one day, and this bliss lifted me up, and I just saw God in every living thing, and the world had such an air of perfection, I can't tell you. And what I thought to myself is, this is for free? How can that be? I'm not doing anything. I'm just walking down the street. And perfection is vibrating in me and all about me. And I felt the most blessed person that's ever walked the earth. It's quite something. This is our true nature. This is how we're meant to live. All this other stuff, this separation, this misery, this angst that we all carry with us, it's not how we're meant to live. Any other thoughts or questions?
If we've created this world and all this illusion, why is it we can't shut it off? Ramana existed even through his realization. Other realized beings stay on this earth, go through the same life.
Mm-hmm. We must be careful in how we conceive of some of these terms. That life is an illusion. It's not quite accurate, I don't think. It's not a quite accurate language. The illusion is that life is separate from life, that there is division in life. That's the illusion. I am separate from you. I am separate from God. I exist as this individualized entity, separate and apart from everything else. Perhaps I walk on the earth, but I'm separate from the earth. I eat its food, but the food doesn't really affect me. I am me. And that is the illusion. It's the illusion of multiplicity in separation. With realization, one can still exist as an individual. And yet there is a deeper awareness, a deeper consciousness that the individuality is a part of everything that is. That it's both universal and individual. As I sit here, I speak to you. I see you as individual people sitting apart from me. I also feel within myself to be in union with a universal consciousness in which there is no separation whatsoever. Individuality and universality coexisting. The individuality is expressing itself from the universality and seen as a temporary movement of consciousness, but not anything that affects the deeper state of self. And the illusion is the idea of separation. Not the fact that there is multiplicity, but that there is multiplicity and separation. There is no separation. And when we heal that wound and change that, then we can continue, as many of the masters do, Lahiri Mahasaya, Ramana Maharshi, Sri Yukteswar, Babaji, they continue to exist as individuals. But their realization is of the universal. And that your individuality, my individuality, everyone's individuality is stemming from this root of universality. So when Mataji asked Babaji about dropping his body, he says, what difference does it make? With a body, without a body. Universality, individuality. He was merged into that universal being. So, in God's great wit, she says, well, if it makes no difference, why not keep a body? How can you argue with that logic? And so he heard the divine will through her. Which is just simply a play. God could have expressed his will directly to him, but he enacted this play. Why? For his own delight. Why does he bring us all together here? For his own delight. It is God giving to God. Is it God in this form giving anything to God in your form? God in your form is giving something to God in this form. Because it's by enacting the play that we give to each other. And so there is a circularness, there is a circuit, a completeness in it. And therefore, the play goes on in delight, in joy, for surprise, for all the things that it brings us. When you see God come in a unique form, it's delightful. It's fun. And when we live in fear and separation, we think, oh, that person isn't acting appropriately or not how they're supposed to be. Or I wouldn't be acting like that if I were them, and so on and so forth. But in divine consciousness, more likely, it's, look at this absolutely marvelous, wonderful play going on here. Who else but God could be acting so outrageously as this individual? That has to be a special edition ROM. And so life takes on joy. It takes on this delight. And that is the very nature of the expression of God, is ananda, is joy, delight, fun, peace, love. Those are all various vibrations of ananda. So we have to be careful in defining what is illusion. Illusion is the idea of separation. Heal that, the play can go on just as it always has. And yet everything has changed, because our perception has changed.
I was just going to share that I'm going to India. It's been a huge surrender to, I'm attached that I'm the only person who can take care of my son. And who's going to remind me to do this, and who's going to remind me to do that, and who's going to notice when he doesn't make a sandwich in the morning. And it's like each thing, I have to just go, okay, it's not his dad or when who's going to be doing it. It's, God's going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's huge because so much of my ego is invested in being a good mom, being a perfect mom. It's like, well, what if this and what if his grades go down because his dad forgets to remind him to do this and that? And it's like, okay, God, here it is.
Mm-hmm.
I just kept on this huge test for me to
Mm-hmm.
prepare to.
I think that Jesus, almost more than any other saint or prophet, explains God as being such a loving parent, saying, loves you more than your own parent could possibly love you. What an intimate, lovely, divine relationship that is. But we don't trust in that, because we see evidence, what seems to be evidence to us in our mind, that there's violence, there's things that seem to go wrong, people get hurt, people die. And so we read into that that's not the act of a loving, infinite, caring, divine parent. But when we really move into that idea that God is that, and that God loves us individually, personally, from that standpoint, beautifully, caringly, it changes our relationship both with ourselves and with the world around us. We learn to let go. We learn that we're not the ultimate arbitrators here of what's right, of what's wrong, of what's good, of what's high, what's low, how things ought to be. We're instruments for that, and that divine will can move through us, but we're not the arbitrators of it. We don't determine that. And it's amazing how much freedom we gain when we let go of that idea that we know better. We are the doers. So what a wonderful opportunity for freedom.
And then getting my car stolen too is an opportunity.
sadhana started long before he went to an ashram. It's ongoing and continuous. And yet I've never seen you in such freedom as I have in the last week.
I feel great. When I get nervous about it, because the children, we all feel like the children are. One thing that God expects you to do is take care of your kids, and the community does. And having met Prem and Sheila, it's a beautiful outcome. Because when I read Papa's story, Papa Ramdas's story, one of the hardest things for me is to deal with him abandoning his wife and child. And here's this beautiful grandson who doesn't come from you don't have a man grow up like Prem unless things are taken care of.
Yeah.
And so that's always helps me when I don't think that's my, I'm not thinking that God's going to ask me to abandon my children. But they have to be God friendly for a few weeks.
But it can defy all human logic of what we expect things to happen or how we expect them to happen. And so oftentimes we try to orchestrate things so carefully and they don't happen anything like what we think they will. And so who's in control of this ship anyway? We find out. We're just reluctant to find out. We like to see ourselves as the center, as the arbitrator, but we're not. But what a huge relief, what a huge freedom comes when we resign from that job. Even when we have many world responsibilities, and we can resign from that and completely give that over to God, what tremendous freedom comes in that. And everything still gets taken care of, and better. But we don't believe it. We just have such a hard time believing it.
I think it's hard sometimes knowing when you're the instrument of God doing divine will, when you're the instrument of your small self. And that's really not easy to determine.
It's not. It's not. Yeah, it's one of our greatest tasks, but it's like our search for truth by determining to find out what is what. It propels us on our own path because it is the search for truth. What is the truth here? Is this inner divine prompting here, or is this something coming from my lower nature or something from my psyche nature? Where is this coming from? And we're in a bit of a catch-22 as sadhakas in that we're asked to search for that inner guidance and to respond to it, and yet by definition we're in ignorance of it. But it's by staying focused on that. I love the story of the two fellows who went to find Larry Mahasya's house. They had no real directions. You've been there, so you know it's not so easy to find. Twisting little lanes and streets, nothing has any street signs to it. Not sure how to get there, not sure even if you've arrived once you are there until you finally see the name on the door. And so they spent hours looking for Larry Mahasya's home in order to go and meditate there and spend some time at the Master's house. Well, this was just a few years ago, and they told his grandson once they arrived, they said, really you should have some street signs, maybe some signs saying that this is his way, the way to his house. And the grandson, being more wise than these people who had just huffed and puffed up and down the streets, said, when else have you spent 2 hours so focused on the Master as you have in these last 2 hours, looking for this house? What a great benefit to you. Obviously, no more street signs are up today than there were at that time. And sometimes it's what our greatest frustrations, our greatest questions are the very things that drive us deepest. One of the things that God showed me this last year was that one of the things about going through really terribly difficult times, and this world represents it. This is a tough, tough place to be. There's just no doubt about that. The wars, the violence, the threats, the unkindnesses of one person to another, all of it. It's a tough place to be, this world is. But because of its very nature, because it is so tough, it drives us more inward. It drives us more to the light ultimately, because it is so difficult. This body is so painful. Ignorance is so sorrowful in our lives. And because of that, we seek out the light and we seek out the truth with much more enthusiasm than we would, say, if we were in the astral planets where the body was at ease and all the environment was beautiful and we could just kind of float along. And here, everything is condensed. And because of that, we make far more spiritual progress when we use it to search for the light, to go deeper within ourselves, to make progress, to find out what the truth is. And again, that acts as a great grace in our life. It's painful, it's difficult, there is no doubt about that. And yet it is grace acting in our lives. So that question, is this divine prompting? Is this coming from my own nature? We have to struggle with it. We have to wrestle with it and do the best we can and still make decisions and still act in our lives. We can't say, well, I'm not going to act until I know with absolute certainty, because there's something about acting, doing, observing the results, coming back, thinking once again, acting, doing, observing the results, and going over that again. That is part of the purification that we're involved with. So somebody would just say, well, just tell me what to do. Just tell me what the right thing is here. Because I don't get it. I give up. But when we truly give up and really surrender to God, then we've made some progress. But that's not what we usually mean when we give up. It means I want to check out. I want out of here. I don't want to have to deal with this. But when we say, okay, God, I get it. I'm not in control of the ship. You guide me. You show me. Then we feel that movement. We feel that direction. We feel the shifting of the wind inside. And we go, did you just notice that? Just what changed there? Just what shifted? That's my movement. That's my direction. And we learn, like good sailors, to listen to the wind, to observe the skies, to see the movements of the stars. And we learn most of all to listen very deeply in ourselves, silently. And the more we're able to do that, the more clearly comes that voice, that direction, that knowing. And there just is really nothing to take the place of doing the work, of going through our lives, doing the best that we can with great earnestness, great devotion, great desire, that replaces that is our sadhana. So Kunti, who was the mother of Arjuna and the other Pandavas, she prayed to Krishna at the end of the wars, and she said, Lord, always give me trouble. Because when things go fine, I don't pay any attention to you at all, and my sons forget you. But when we're in trouble, we never forget you. And we're always seeking to do your will. So give me trouble so that I might always remember you. Well, we might try to shortcut that and just say, God, let me always remember you. Give or take your trouble as you will, but I want to remember you always. And isn't it true, isn't it, when we're up against the wall that we never prayed so deeply. As the saying goes, there's no atheists in the foxholes.
Vision of God very, very carefully, carrot stick, carrot stick. As long as we follow the carrot, we don't get the stick.
How much nicer it is to get up and walk through the door than to get dragged through the door. And yet it's our own desire nature that's propelling us toward the door and through the door. So it is our desire to grow. How many of us wish to accomplish things and do things, but we don't really do it until the day of the deadline, or a day or two after. And we're so anxious and we're so twisted about it, and we just but we just do it to ourselves again and again. And why is that? There's just something in our human nature that unless we get that little bit of a stick, we just don't get it. That's what pushes us. How much nicer to get up and walk through the door. Say, God, be like Yogananda. God, I'm running to you. Get out of my way, because I'm coming. I'm coming. And you can't avoid me, and you can't push me away, and there's nothing you can do. But I'm coming with all barrels. How can God resist a child like that?
I love your story of Mother and Yogananda. And David, in their realms that they're in, what do you believe their mission to be?
It is exactly how they live their own lives. And that is, they want us to experience the same joy, the same freedom, the same light that they themselves enjoy. That is their greatest desire, is that we should be lifted into the realms that they live in. Because they just, if you were to see, let's say, an adult who just never grew up, and they never took responsibility, and they never took care of their lives, and as a result, they just lived in terrible conditions, and they felt terrible about themselves. And wouldn't your heart just go out to them and say, just to kind of turn that corner and get some self-esteem and feel good about what you're doing and feel some joy in life and have some healthy relationships. And you can just see that for them, and you could just see them. They could just turn a corner there. They could have some of that for themselves, and their lives would change so much. And these great masters, we shouldn't think about them that they're looking down on us somehow. Oh, those poor little ants down there, they're just so low and, so twisted and so corrupted, and who could ever love anything like that? No, that's our conception. That's not their conception. When they look at us, they see themselves. They see themselves in their own evolution as they themselves, that we're walking the same path that they themselves walked. And they know those rocks, they know those stumbles, they know those obstacles, and yet they also know the victories that come afterwards. They know the heights that can be reached. They know the freedom that can be had. And so they see themselves and us both in our frailty but also in our victory. And they can taste that for us. They can just say, oh, if they could just turn a corner there, they would then see what they've been striving for, what they've been working for. But they have to strain, they have to get it, they have to work at it. And they would do anything at all, even as a good parent or anybody who loved another, would help another in a way of real help of us getting there. But they also know that there's something that happens when the chick breaks open that shell that gives the chick the strength. And if they don't break open that shell in order to escape, they're never quite whole. And so they also know there's power, there's a necessity in the struggle. But they're with us in the struggle. They want us to win. They want us to struggle. They want us to overcome. And they know every inch of the territory. They've been over it themselves. And so when they look on us, they see themselves, and they see themselves emerging in us. And it quickens our spirit, and it changes our mind. And suddenly we can see something beyond what we've seen before. We believe something and something bigger. And so we get grace through them. And so at once they see the whole thing as very mirthful, completely filled with joy and ananda, as they themselves are. And they have compassion on us, and they know exactly what it is that we go through every step of the way. And they're there with us. And by focusing our minds upon them, we draw grace from them. Because it draws their presence, and their presence is a blessing and a grace. How beautiful, how wonderful. And as we grow spiritually, we can do the same for others as well. It happens naturally. Not anything we have to set out to do. It just happens by the very nature of our being. And so it grows like that. It just lifts everything up. Jesus says, if I be lifted up, shall lift all mankind with me. But we look around and we don't see too much evidence of all of that. And yet we do. It's difficult to compare the world, to think of what this world would have been like if Jesus had never incarnated upon it. It's made a tremendous difference, and it has lifted up the minds of thousands and millions and changed this world. And yet each individual, so many people are looking for a savior to come and change the world, some spiritual master to come and make everybody behave. Like the right parent coming, you kids behave to all the nations. Quit fighting with each other. Start cooperating. And there's so many who desire for some outside agency to come and change. But we are the culmination of this earth. Each individual is. And it's up to each one of us to evolve, to live as we ought to live, to be as we ought to be. Nothing can replace that. And that's what we're called upon to do. And people don't want to hear that because they don't want to bear the responsibility. That they are responsible for this world. Individually and collectively. We all are. We must bear that responsibility. And it's not easy when we see the world in the condition that it oftentimes is. But it's the truth. It is the truth. So they want us to know what they know. They want us to feel what they feel. They want us to be what they are. That's their mission.
referred to a great price and the pearl.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, there is a story in the Bible of the pearl of the great price. Pearl of great price. There's another story that goes along with that where a man had the most beautiful pearl in the entire world. It's many years ago. He put it up for sale. It says $1,000 for this pearl. Most perfect, most beautiful. Nothing compared to it. So he got many offers. People trying to bargain. I'll give you $500 for it. Nothing doing. I'll give you $750. Forget it. 900. No. 950. Never. $999. No. $999.99. Never. The price is $1,000. Everything that individual had, he gave for that pearl of great price. As long as you think you can bargain with God, I'll meditate a little bit here and there, and I'll get, omnipresence and omnipotence, and I'll have some power of positive thinking here, and I'll be rolling in dough, and everybody will love me, and that God is a horse trader. He's a merchant, and we treat him like that. And it's not until you get to that point where you let go of the idea of the result and are willing to surrender everything, willing to give everything for the pearl of great price. It's not until then that you get it. And the mind is a natural horse trader. It's always out for the bargain. It wants to test it. Is it really true? Maybe I could pop some of these drugs, and I can get it that way. Maybe I can sit on this special blanket, and I'll meditate on that, and I'll get it that way. Maybe true enough, with yoga science, we're given some shortcuts. We're given some very powerful techniques. But they don't replace that place of complete surrender. They only help aid us in bringing us to that place, to that point of mind. So that's the pearl of great price. And people don't want to hear that. They want to hear some middle path. They want to hear some easy way. If I meditate under a purple light for a while, then I'll get it. It doesn't work that way. Yeah. Yeah, just as long as we're holding something back and saying, I'll just give a little over here, but I'm holding the real goods back here, it'll never happen. It's not until we empty the cup that it can be filled up with that spiritual wine. And there's just no substitute for that. But people are afraid of that. People don't want that. It's difficult. There is no doubt about it that's difficult. But that is the truth of it.
Well, you're left with an empty cup, and that's the only thing you're sure of.
Yeah. And what happens after that? I don't know. What does it look like? I don't know. Will I find fulfillment? I don't know. Well, what kind of bargain is that? The bargaining mind doesn't want anything to do with that. Because it's not a sure deal. We really want a sure bet.
Is that too much to ask?
It is. It is. Because we're still holding on, and until that hand becomes open and receptive, as long as it's grasping, it can't receive. It can only receive when that hand opens and is receptive. And that desire nature, that need for safety, for surety, for bargaining, that makes the hand closed. And it's grasping and not finding, not holding. And so oftentimes, and it happens very subtly, we get lifted up in spiritual consciousness and we start to grasp, I don't want this to go away. I want it to stay. I want it to be just like this. I want it to go on forever. And we've just squeezed the life right out of that experience. And then we wonder, why am I feeling separate now? It just went away on me. And we did it to ourselves. And it is natural, it is human. It is what we do. But it's terribly tragic. So it's difficult to resist that impulse to grasp, to try to contain, to try to control. And that becomes our spiritual sadhana, is to remain open-handed, to remain receptive, to remain an instrument. We are not the captors, we're the captees. And to go there willingly. Become a slave of Ram. There's no greater freedom. Such are the paradoxes of spirit. Should we chant for a bit? If you'd like to chant after me, I'll chant first and then you chant in response. Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram Om. 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 Shri Rama Jai Ram Jai Jai Rama.
Shri Rama Jai Ram Jai Jai Rama.
Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Rama.
Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Rama.
Shri Rama Jai Ram Jai Jai Rama.
Shri Rama Jai Ram Jai Jai Rama.
Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Rama.
Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Rama.
Shri Rama Jai Ram Jai Jai Rama.
Shri Rama Jai Ram Jai Jai Rama.
Shri Ram 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 Jai
Ram Jai Jai Rama. O Heavenly Father,
O Heavenly Father,
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
I feel the wonder and the beauty
I feel the wonder and the beauty
of Thy glorious presence
of Thy glorious presence
in every part of my being.
in every part of my being.
My heart is bursting with my love for Thee.
My heart is bursting with my love for Thee.
I kneel in adoration at Thy feet
I kneel in adoration at Thy feet
and surrender myself to Thee.
and surrender myself to Thee.
I feel the power of Thy perfection
I feel the power of Thy perfection
surging in every cell of my body.
surging in every cell of my body.
My mind and my intelligence
My mind and my intelligence
are radiant with Thy healing light.
are radiant with Thy healing light.
My soul is filled with the ecstasy and bliss
My soul is filled with the ecstasy and bliss
of my communion with Thee.
of my communion with Thee.
I and my Father are one.
I and my Father are one.
Blessed Spirit, I am He.
Blessed Spirit, I am He.
Peace, bliss, Amen. May God and the Master's blessings be upon you. May they bless you with the thought of their presence, the love of their hearts, the sacredness of their souls. Be ever mindful of your spiritual journey and ever bent upon making progress upon it. Continue to meet in homes. When I am away, meditate upon God deeply, inviting Him into your heart, your mind, your soul. So purify yourselves that you are radiant lights of His one infinite being. You are His child. Nay, you are He. Know it and become free. Be it ever so. Amen.